Good afternoon, everyone. Bear with me, I just got off a 14-hour plane from Nepal, so I'm like, I don't know which way the world is turning right now, but I should be able to make it through 15 minutes, I think. The title of the short talk today I'd like to talk about is Technology and Technique. And let me just sort of preface this, I am the first landscape architect, right? So there will be a second one coming right after me. But it's not going to be too landscape-centric. I want to really talk about where I think the future is going through showing a series of projects. But first I'd like to just start with the context of landscape architecture and where I think technology lends itself directly to technique. And for this, I began to sort of think about some of the things that are worrisome to me in landscape architecture. And it's one that the standards have actually been created through these larger sort of technological advances. And within landscape architecture, there's almost a punch list of things that we actually make, and we call them these new technologies. And these might fall under BMPs. They might be bioswales, rain gardens, green roofs, screed tree planting, retention, detention, green buildings, green facades, etc. And we lose sight of the actual real technological advance. And so I'd like to suggest that maybe we should return to a larger discourse and think more about how we got to this place and really begin to think about making landscapes that are much more performative. Performative in a way that comes out of linguistics where that there is a response. The performer doesn't perform until they open their mouth or before they begin to dance or sing. And this idea that the landscape can be activated. It could be activated through human use, but it could also be activated through a highly collaborative exercise between environmental designers. I'd like to start with this first project. For me, how do we make these things disappear and become larger, more versatile interventions that allow us to experience real places and real things? It's very interesting working on the new De Young Museum with Herzog and Demerol. What's very fascinating to me that everybody always talks about the skin as this fantastic technological advance, but it's actually the building's base isolated, right? There's a 15-foot trench around the entire building. During an earthquake, the building will actually dance. Most people don't know that. It's not recognized within the dance of design. This first image I'm showing you I call a bioline. It was created for my MFA thesis, and I was really interested in, could I filter the air with inside of a closed, hermetically sealed building? And could I somehow not hide this effect, but allow this technological advance to basically laminate itself within a previous technological advance, which is the forced air vent. Next. And this idea sort of culminates in a gallery where the piece was actually part of a show, but in most cases, people missed the piece, which for me made it completely disappear. And it disappeared and became activated within the actual Sullivan Gallery. You can just go through these. Another aspect of the piece that began to suggest that technologies can be part of our lives and they could be transformative is that within the bioline are small plants that don't really need dirt, but they actually need the hand of people to actually water them. And I enlisted the aid of 6 art students to make 1,100 bags out of recycled material to actually hold the plants inside. Next. And so the idea that outside, inside gets completely flattened and that the experience or the collaboration between the landscape and the architecture becomes a seamless experience. Next. This next project is really attempting to sort of talk more about the San Francisco Bay and those technologies that allow us to live within these wet environments. This new building, I can only talk about this article here. This new building was developed about 4 years ago, and the idea for this building between landscape and architect was a building that could think for itself in an environment, that it's set in a marsh environment, and could the building actually think? And so through this rigorous collaborative effort, through architect, engineer, landscape architect, could we arrive at a new way to express multiple technologies and not the single thing? Next. And so basically we looked, well, I looked more specifically towards the biomimicry as a new technology and ways to think about the Bay landscape. And here, scalability, as some urban designers might call it, can we work one-to-one with the environment in which we're actually making a building and an environment? And so these are basic samples from the San Francisco Bay at the same scale of the site. And what you begin to see is that there's one monumental sort of move that's tied back into the dendritic pattern of the actual bay and the way that water moves through. Next. And so this seamless experience, or merging these technologies together, gave us one thing, which ended up being this larger bioline condition. And it's basically a ramp with a flow-through planter that goes from roof all the way to the ground. And its length is based on the scale of the dendritic patterns at the bay. So it's working one-to-one within that system. And so the technologies that allow that to happen, from rainwater harvesting through facade studies, literally disappears, and we're enmeshed in the experience of the bay through these technologies. Next. Next. This next project is a little bit more simple. The collaboration here is through a design builder and a landscape architect, myself, and we won a competition to basically place 5,000 PV panels 3 by 5 feet in a landscape for the University of Buffalo. And what's very interesting here was through the competition, we understood the technology, the solar technology, but no one had an understanding of the landscape technologies that at play at Buffalo. And you have to understand the history of the University of Buffalo is that a landscape architecture firm designed this new campus. This is the suburban campus, and they basically moved a creek or a river. They basically moved a river maybe 500 yards one way and basically filled the site in and put the new campus there. And so what happened with all this new alluvium, the campus, nothing can grow there because it's all bad dirt. And so for us, the solar Strand, next, we attempted to talk about these technologies that could be at play to restore this landscape back to its fertile sort of origins that will allow the simplest tree to grow. And through this, we codified how the solar Strand could actually sit within this landscape. Next. And we used the DNA fingerprint, and we wrote a script that would allow us to place the panels in a quarter-mile-long row within this new regenerated landscape. And this landscape will be constantly changing because they're constantly making new dirt. And this new dirt that they'll basically be making in this landscape is tied to this solar array. Next. And the solar array has a very didactic legend to it, and it's basically how it's going to allow new lighting for all of the dormitories that surround the campus. So students will be able to come to this landscape and actually see where the power is going through the codification of the solar array. Next. But within that, this new regenerative landscape, where the techniques to regenerate the landscape are actually hidden and embedded in the landscape. And these two things create one experience once again. Next. And so your experience might be walking through this new quarter-mile-long solar array, but below your feet, this landscape is recharging and it's constantly changing. And we just made a decision last week is to basically not cut any of the landscape and actually let the native species actually find themselves there. And we'll basically cut it once a year and let anything and everything grow there. And I think right now we have 63 species of plants that will volunteer. Next. And now we're in the construction of basically remaking the dirt here. Next. And thinking about how the panels will actually sit through this codified new landscape. Next. And lastly, I wanted to talk about this final project, which is a new visitor center in downtown San Francisco. And this, again, is a collaboration between engineer, architect, landscape architect. Next. Here, the technologies that are being played have to do with historic preservation, but it also has to do with the ecology of the Bay Area. The new mint is old mint. It's about 150 years old. It's the only one of the few buildings that survived the San Francisco earthquake of the early 20th century. It basically housed, or below it, was the only potable water that could be used after the quake. So it has a very significant sort of status within the city. If you go to Fifth and Mission today, you have no idea that water is below your feet. The bay is 3 blocks away. You have no idea where you are. The building is being repurposed. And on our way to repurposing the building, we actually found that the roof of the building was built in the early 20th century. So we actually had a 1-floor area that the historic preservationists couldn't mess with us. And so we basically exploited that. And I suggested that we basically flip the building and put the marsh that used to be there, that basically held the life of San Francisco. We put that back on the roof and have this new performative sort of structure basically preserve the building. Next. And so we were able to do this, again, by thinking about the bay patterns of wet and dry, but also some of the technological advances that have taken place within the bay itself, chip design and computer design. And working with the curators there, your first experience of San Francisco, of the city, will be through this new roof landscape that will allow you to basically plug in and understand the hydrological patterns, the cultural history, as well as making your own decisions about what that real space is, because you will experience it, not the actual thing. Next. So working with engineers, again, working with scientists, we're working to sort of create this new layer of experience on top of a pre-existing structure, so that, again, the real experience of something that once existed now collapses back on top of you. Next. And so one of the workshops we held, we had a 2-day biomimicry workshop where about 18 different designers sat in a room for 2 days and came up with a total scheme for the building. And the one that we move probably further with was really looking at the redwood forest and looking at its hydrological cycle and how the water moved from the redwoods all the way back down to the bay. And so through the building is actually becoming almost an aquifer for what's above and what's below. And so the visitor comes in and actually experiences all of these things via these new technologies. Rainwater harvesting is a big sort of piece that we're dealing with, as well as new facade studies on the west side and south side. There will be a completely new roof put on that's able to basically catch solar energy as well as protect inhabitants within. Next. And so the experience of this new space, again, it's not of one thing. It's not about what the building looks like. It's not about how the facade is developed. It's not about even how the flow-through planters that allow the water to move through are exhibited. It's about, again, a kind of total landscape where all of the techniques are enmeshed together to create one environmental experience. Next. And over time, particularly to the Bay, and I showed 2 projects in the Bay Area, what's fantastic about the Bay is it has a monsoon, meaning we get most of our rain during one period of time. So it's very easy to sort of allow many of these things to come to the surface, and so that people can be engaged within that environment. Next. And I mentioned this notion of real environment and real experience a couple of times here, and I think what we must sort of return to is this ability to allow each and every one of us to actually see the places in which we live and play and work, and to make our own decisions, right, about how we want to interact with them. And so it's very important for us, through the garnishing of all of these new technologies, whether digital, whether industrial, to all of a sudden allow not the thing to be present, but those spaces to be present for people to experience in them firsthand and to make their own decisions. Thank you.